Welcome to today's webinar. Webinar is entitled Human Potential, Shaping the Best Possible New Normal. And the speaker is Ruth Murray-Webster, and introducing will be your host, Naomi Brooks. Very straightforward. What we want to know is, where in the world are you today? So we'll look and see who we've got far afield, but we'll go to the formal introduction in a minute. Manchester, Bristol. So thank you for sending in that information. I haven't spotted any abroad just yet. It's moving too quickly for me, but thank you again for that information. Yeah, and we now have over 200 attendees, which is great. So the second question, so that we can actually segment you as an audience, is we want to know what project-related job role do you typically perform. So there's a role group: leadership, delivery specialists, and business analysis and change. They're taken from the Project Delivery Capability Framework, which is a document I thoroughly recommend. And then we've got specific ones for PMO. Educator and consultant is a new group that we've added there. So Ruth gives you some idea of the audience that we've got today. It's interesting, possibly less people in leadership roles than we've seen before, and a good number in PMO. So thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to hand on to Naomi now, who's going to formally introduce Ruth to you. Naomi.
Thanks so much, Merv. Well, good afternoon. I'm going to stick with that, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be your host. My name is Naomi Brooks, and I am Warwick University's brand new Professor of Complex Programme Management. So one of my first tasks, it's my absolute pleasure this afternoon to introduce Dr. Ruth Murray-Webster to you. Not least of which because I'm delighted to say Ruth, actually a member of our adjunct faculty here at Warwick, also with the opposition at Said as well. In her extended 30-year history of gurudom, I'm going to use that word, don't know if it's a real word, but I'm going to use it, in project change and project risk, you may have encountered Ruth in a whole variety of guises. Some of you will know her seminal book, Understanding and Managing Risk Attitude. You'll know her as the joint editor of our current APM body of knowledge. As we speak, she's working on another really interesting book, Managing Successful Programs. And Ruth actually launched her own business, Potentiality, in 2017. For this final webinar in the series, Ruth's going to talk about the really fascinating issue of human potential. And given the incredibly difficult circumstances in which we find ourselves, how we can actually shape that to come out with the best possible new normal. I'll speak to you again when Ruth is finished and answer the questions, but for now, and without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to hand you over for a fascinating talk to Dr. Ruth Murray-Webster.
Thank you, Naomi. That's great, and really good to have you introducing. But this is me and my company and my what I would call my signature piece of art, my favourite piece of art that relates to my work, that really sums up my views on the challenges of change. I have to change to stay the same. It seems this sentiment has never been more true in my lifetime than now. When I was asked to do this webinar in late March, just about as we went into lockdown, I was honoured to be asked and to lead this session on a topic that's really close to my heart, on human potential. And I was also, and quite unusual for me, for those of you who know me, not quite sure what to say. As the weeks have gone by, I've planned and replanned this session. My staggering insights in early April have faded into insignificance in early May. Our social media is overflowing with ideas and questions about the new normal. And it made me wish I'd not used that phrase in the title, given it's become somewhat of a cliche. Is anything stable enough to talk about with authority today? Probably not. To share ideas and start a conversation. I'm actually really humbled to share some ideas today and excited to hear your views. I've got quite a few questions that I'll keep asking, and the question session at the end, or indeed an ongoing conversation after today. I have unfailing faith in human potential. Whether you believe that our abilities and free will are God-given, or whether you believe that through evolution we've honed our ability to be resilient, or both, the potential energy in us, wound up, ready to go, I believe is immense. I wonder how far the potentiality circle extends into what we believe is impossible. We also know that project-based working is vital to bring about beneficial change, whether that's creation of tall buildings, whether it's robotics, whether it's amazing prosthetics or new tech-enabled ways of working. You might be working through projects, mega projects, major projects, complex projects, strategic projects, lots of names out there, or programs or portfolios. You might be approaching those changes using linear or iterative and incremental life cycles. So when I use the word projects in this session, I'm going to use the word generically to embrace planned change, however that's structured and governed. And I just propose that today isn't a day for definitional debates. So we've had a massive shock. We have an abundance of potential. And what do we do next? What are the implications for the world of project management post-pandemic? I have more questions than answers for sure, but hopefully I've got some cracking questions that will help you think through your next steps. So I want to start with what we know and maybe things that we don't do so well. My work helps clients unlock the potential performance from uncertainty and change so they can deliver their objectives. And in normal times, this requires a focus on 4 things. We need to understand our objectives and what matters the most. We need to understand disruptions and what's happening now. We need to understand emergent trends, what the available data is telling us, and what we will believe of that data and what we'll act upon. And we need to think about change, what situations are unfrozen, and where we have a choice to do things differently. And I propose that all this still applies in shaping the new normal. But let's unpick it a little and ask you some questions along the way to see what may have changed in our thinking. I've got 10 questions over the whole session. So the first 3 come in this next section.
So the first question, do you expect organisational and project strategies, goals and objectives to fundamentally change this year? So yes, no, maybe. And Ruth, can you see the answers coming in?
I can see the answers coming in, and that is looking like a pretty resounding yes. With a smattering of no's and maybes. And I really wasn't sure what people would say to this, because some of you are in sectors that are not changing at all and it's business as usual, and I guess other people are hoping to get back to business as usual. But certainly there's 70% are expecting fundamental changes this year, so that's really interesting to see. The next question sort of builds on from this. So if we could go to this next one. So what I was really hoping here was for you to think about the personal objectives of your colleagues, well, of yourself and of your colleagues, and how much you think the personal objectives of your colleagues might change. And again, it's like when I was writing these questions, I had no clue what you were going to say. Yeah, so you are, in general, expecting quite a bit of change in some of those areas of maybe the percentage of time we spend working, our willingness to travel in certain ways or to certain places. I guess we're not going to be going to work with a cold much more, and building community also, at home, focus on healthcare, and maybe a lesser focus on money and possessions. So really interesting. And one of the things I've been pondering in putting this together is whether, given changes, organisational strategies and goals, or some of these personal objectives, whether we need to be thinking differently about decision criteria when we're prioritising investments in projects, or certainly to make some different underpinning assumptions about how we get work done on our projects. And you know, my experience, and I'm sure it's yours too, is that one of the most important things we do as leaders is to make sure that we explicitly discuss objectives with stakeholders. And it's never more important than after significant disruption. The assumptions we once held dear may well have changed. It looks like some of them have from this slide, and I think we failed to check them out at our peril. Okay, so just thinking about disruptions, well, we know what's just happened, don't we? But what's the current state? You know, not just of the R number or of the economy, but the state of other factors that influence the ability for our projects to be successful. That might be health of supply chains, it might be fragility of partners, it might be attitudes of consumers. And it makes me reflect upon, well, where did we get our information from before? And are those information sources still the best ones? So the next question is about sources of data that you believe will inform future strategies and plans. And I've been thinking, you know, maybe this would shift. So just this is one where you're asked to rank those 4 things, you know, thinking of the data your organisation will need in future to inform decisions. So own research, I mean your own organisation's research or other research from other places, trade and professional body opinions, mainstream media. And of course, I've not asked you to say how much that has changed from now. Maybe it hasn't changed at all, or maybe it has. Interesting there for for Major Projects Association and for APM that trade and professional body opinion, you know, is up there with own research. Actually, not a massive difference in the top 3. We're not relying on mainstream media too much. Maybe we never did. So thank you for sharing that. So just want to you know, continue thinking about emergent trends and what we might pay attention to. So just over 15 years ago, with my colleague David Hilson, I became fascinated with the influences on our perception of what's risky and why, and how that influences our choices and decisions. So, you know, standing on the shoulders of giants in behavioural economics and risk psychology, we know that there is a triple strand of influences. And I just want to talk about that a little bit. We know that some of our choices and decisions are affected by conscious and situational assessments. You know, we're asking, have I seen anything like this before? Was my past experience good or bad? Do I think I can directly manage this, influence the outcome? How close the impact is to my objectives in time? Those sorts of things, all quite rational and conscious. Then there's another set of things that we might call subconscious mental shortcuts, heuristics, or cognitive biases. And there's a long list of things that have evolved over time to make the job of the human brain easier when faced with information. So a subconscious assessment of, have I experienced anything like this before, could save your life if it's sensory information like hairs on the back of your neck standing up about an advancing predator. But unfortunately, what we perceive isn't always what's real. We're naturally, in the words of Dan Ariely's fine book, predictably irrational. And it gets worse than that, because whether we like it or not, our emotions also have a massive part to play. So whether that's fear or less extreme emotions that may lead us away from something we don't want, or desire for something that we do want, these are shown to be some of the most powerful influences on decision making under uncertainty. And without awareness and an ability to respond, not react, we chase the things that we believe will bring us more pleasure than pain. And that's happening in boardrooms, government, and everywhere else. The point of the triple strand isn't just that there are 3 sets of influences on our perceptions in risky and important situations, but that the 3 are interwoven, so that at the point of making a decision, we don't know for sure what's driving our behaviour. It's a complex mix of influences that's not easy to decipher. And most of the time that's good. It allows us to free flow It allows us to go about our day making decisions all the time and in mainly sensible ways. Sometimes when the consequence of the decision could really matter, it's really bad. And it gets worse for decision-making groups, because not only is everyone different, perceives different things, but group biases come into play. So we follow the leader to avoid challenge. We seek refuge in safety in numbers to preserve relationships, or we get drawn into risky or cautious shifts, talking ourselves into or out of decisions collectively. All decision makers, and particularly decision-making groups, need effective ways of understanding what's going on so they can make eyes-open choices. So what's the point of this for our situation now? Just think back to February, if you can remember that far back. What was going on in February that shaped our perceptions about the risk of a global pandemic that would kill thousands of people early, crush our economy, keep us locked down for 10+ weeks, so many businesses need to be propped up by government or collapse? Now, no one wants to be chicken licking, pretending the sky's about to fall in. And of course, hindsight's a wonderful thing. But the data made it clear that the chance of a global pandemic of this scale was very possible. And most of us just didn't want to see, hear, or act upon it. So it makes me think, what else might we be ignoring that might be brilliant or devastating for our objectives? I believe that engaging with data on emergent trends matters if we're to make the best decisions we can under uncertainty. Making investment decisions for projects, assuming the world is known and will be stable until we're finished, is foolish work. And I believe there's much room for improvement in this regard in project land. So I want to ask you 2 more questions here. Next question. Okay, so here's one where you get to choose an image. So what I'd like you to do is think about your organisation's approach to scenario and resilience planning in the past, and choose a picture. And maybe be thinking about what additional capacity did we have in our supply chains, in our bank balances, in our team's capabilities, and in our systems, just in case. Now that's really interesting. I can say that I wasn't expecting that, and that's good. That suggests that 60% at least of our organisations were ready for what's just happened. You knew what you were going to do. You had contingency plans ready, and you were able to implement them. And that number's coming down a bit. Got a good even split between people with their organisations with their head metaphorically in the sand, organisations that actually had good capacity stockpiles of whether it was capabilities or money or kits, or goods. And unfortunately, 15% who were relying on being superheroes. But that's better than I thought. And I did want to just talk about superheroes a bit more, because without a doubt, we've seen our human potential to be brilliant crisis managers in abundance, I would suggest. And I'm really grateful for the many people who've made sure that things are not descended into chaos and anarchy. But in the world of projects, it's obviously not okay only to be brilliant crisis managers. So following on from these numbers, if this was the past, then I'm interested in what you're thinking about maybe changes in attitudes to planning for multiple possible futures in your organisation. And this is a simpler one. So going forward, will you and when I say you, this could be you as an individual, or do you think your organisation will prioritise planning for multiple possible futures? Yeah, splendid. Maybe under maybe I should have said, yeah, we probably should do, but something else might get in the way.
Segment by those job roles, but a significant number of leaders that are in the yes camp. But
well, I think that's the right answer, isn't it? Moving on, change. Well, 10 weeks on, things are unfrozen for sure. So what shall we do next? So what I'm going to do in the rest of the time and moving quickly through is look at 4 areas of human potential. They all pose big opportunities as well as associated threats. All will require decisions to support our objectives, and all will require project-based change to change the future. So the 4 areas all start with E. I want to look at economic potential, working potential, ecological or environmental potential, and emotional potential. So moving on to look at economical potential. So will our recovery from recession be a V shape, a U shape, an L shape, a W shape, or something else? There's been much said about the death of GDP as our single measure of economic progress. The triple bottom line of profit, social and environmental progress or other GDP plus approaches are really important. So do forgive me in this session for just focusing on GDP. An article in the Financial Times on the 1st of May, and yet that was a whole month ago, suggested that the proposed V for victory that had been discussed through April, i.e. an immediate bounce back, was now a V for vain hope. But the same article did posit the chance of a Nike swoosh type recovery. It sounded good at the time. Some sectors are booming, of course, and others are looking very sick. Some sectors will undoubtedly bounce right back, and others will need some tough decisions and all the potential we can muster to carve out the appropriate future path. Another article in the FT in early May, a Gillian Tett article, was brave enough to raise the topic of how much GDP it's worth spending to contain a pandemic. That I've raised this question now might have resulted in you taking a sharp intake of breath. Is she morally bankrupt, mentioning this now when people are dying? Or was that just in April when we thought that and we've got used to it? What the article asked that really resonated with me and my experience in organisations is this question. Are we failing to realise our economic potential if we continue to put the experts in silos and therefore in conflict? We need to make tough choices. We need to trade some things for others. We need the medics and the economists and all the other experts to collaborate to find the relative priorities of objectives for the project to get Britain back on its feet again. And as in all of our projects, you never keep all the people happy all the time, but you also don't find the optimal or least worst solution until you start to collaborate. So in our companies and in our projects, what will we trade for what? How will we work together, not in silos, but collaboratively to balance threats and opportunities with eyes open for the common good? This situation puts a whole new perspective on values about going home safely every day when we are trading COVID-19 deaths for the lasting mental health of a generation of younger people whose rug has been pulled from under their feet. So how will we get the economy moving responsibly? And what will we trade? If a V isn't likely in many sectors, and if an L is to be avoided, we either get a big fat U shape or we get a W. And we're told that the second peak of COVID-19 infections and deaths is the thing to avoid, that delaying a return to economic activity is preferable to the W. I wonder, is a W so bad? There was a great blog post written in the Medium in mid-March by Thomas Pueo that talked about the hammer and the dance as the most effective strategy for beating this coronavirus. Some of you might have read it. It was quite viral at the time. The hammer and the dance, it's the sort of thing that Australia, Singapore, South Korea, Germany have done, and that I think we're starting to try to do. And it says to me really clearly that dancing isn't a route march. It's a sensitive expression of collaboration, of give and take, of trying things, failing fast, learning. And it seems to me that project professionals have much to offer here to help organisations and our country to develop more agility and flexibility. If any of my family are watching now, they might think that's our dog. It's not our dog, but an image there of, you know, the sorts of behaviour that is really agile. And I think it seems sensible that the implications for projects are that we should be doing a larger number of smaller things, creating minimal viable products, using incremental programmatic governance, chunking up the work into products we can deliver at pace and then build on later. And I think that not just our project approaches need to be flexible, we need to be flexible too to help build the economy in the places where it's possible. And for some of this might mean leaving behind old norms. My friend and ex-business partner, Sergio Pellegrinelli, always uses the metaphor of a unicyclist to describe the project leader who can balance, provide direction, bring motion and change direction, all with no hands. And as the picture of Mr. Dan shows, leaving the hands free to juggle or maybe spin plates. As a non-sector specific project practitioner and advisor for many years, maybe this is the time that we'll finally kill our identity as I'm a PM in this sector and build the skills to be confident with an identity of I'm a PM who can lead any project-based change endeavour. Maybe that Nike swoosh is possible. What do you think? So think to the end of 2022, if you can. So what's your best educated guess for the shape of the economic recovery to the end of 2022? Hey, there's some Nike swooshes coming in here. That's interesting. I'm going to ask you why you think this in a minute. Yeah, so the V looks to be for vain hope for most of you. But we're not so pessimistic as to think it's just going to be an L, and the majority of us thinking that, yeah, we're going to be living with a W. Really interesting. It's difficult times for sure, isn't it? What the next question does is just ask you in 2 or 3 words, but what was the reason of your previous choice? You don't need sentences, just odd words, and let's see what comes up there. Interesting. So second wave is quite prominent. Yeah, lots of uncertainties. But, you know, there were also, you know, some interesting things that came in at the start about, you know, whether recovery is going to be slow, actually whether GDP is quite resilient and bounces back. Well, I'm going to be really interested to study this actually afterwards, because there seems to be an equal balance of optimism and pessimism in there from what I can see. But with uncertainty, second wave, and of course the looming opportunity or threat of Brexit, depending on your point of view, also probably third in there. Thank you very much. That's okay. Really, really interesting. Yeah, moving on. So, you know, if thinking about economic potential might have seemed a little above our pay grade, then e-working potential definitely isn't. What an interesting experiment with some great technology-enabled successes and an opportunity for looking dressed when you're still in your pyjama bottoms, aka new normal work trousers. We've shown our resiliency and creativity from churches to creatives to corporates. And in our projects, we've been able to accelerate long-standing aspirations of e-options, from trials and hearings in our justice system, to teaching, training and exams, to TV and entertainment more widely. So what's the real potential here? For the first time for me 2 weeks ago, I talked to a client that was seriously considering not returning its 100+ employees to work from an office in central London. I understand Twitter and others have followed, have already decided that in future, its people can, WFA, work from anywhere. But also with our e-working potential, it's great to see people signing up new clients who they've never met in the flesh. That's amazing. But others who really miss the buzz of the workplace, laughing with colleagues, being a family at work. What do we want the new normal to be, and what change do we need to make that happen? If those who can work from anywhere do stay home or work in coffee shops, I'm thinking we need accelerated growth and capability of telecoms and collaboration tools. That's totally possible. More difficult is what happens to real estate in cities, public transport, and of course hospitality. And I'm also thinking impacts on team collaboration beyond the tech solution, consensus building across decision-making teams, and the ability to be creative together. And what about the ability to train and onboard new people, not least those entering work for the first time? And I guess we'll all get more choosy about when we invest in getting together with people in the flesh. Those with an extroversion tendency, people who think out loud, draw energy from others, may be more effective than those whose energy comes from within. And then it got me thinking beyond this, we've had a real taste of changing attitudes to what work is valued. Now, I don't know about where you live, but nobody has banged a pan with a wooden spoon at 8 o'clock on Thursdays for some booted and suited executive. Maybe our two-tier society between white-collar and blue-collar workers will be reconfigured to be frontline, goes out to work, and back office mainly stays at home. And as a result, we may reward work differently and make different choices of what's a good job. So with those, things in mind, I've got another couple of questions for you.
For how much of the time could you work from anywhere in the future? And this is in the form of a statement. In the future, I could work from anywhere, never to always.
And this is about could you, not would you want to. So interesting. I mean, we've got a real mix of people on this call, but yeah, certainly, for the vast majority of the time, that looks like 4 out of 5 days you could work from anywhere. And I guess I'm not actually that surprised at that question. The second question in this series is actually then about getting the economy working and the priority of that in sectors like real estate, especially city offices, transport, hospitality, etc. And of course, this comes in direct opposition to the other questions maybe. This is really interesting because if we can work, if on average we could work from anywhere 80% of the time, but yet there's only 30% of us saying no, it's not a priority to get those sectors working again, then there are some things that we need to trade. We could decide to make a massive change in the area of e-working, but should we and will we? And I think, as throughout this whole webinar, you're getting the gist now that, of course, I have no answers. I guess you don't too, but some really interesting questions. And just as that's going up, my goodness, that's in thirds now. So that suggests that there's going to be a real debate that needs to be had, within organisations and within our country in this area. Brilliant. And then we can start to look at the next area, which is our ecological or environmental potential, the third area. Are the immediate impacts on air quality and other forms of pollution worth keeping? I was reading about the potential we have to use this hiatus to make a step change towards our climate change commitments. And it was interesting that the argument was that we won't achieve climate change targets by not doing things, not starting to drive again, not starting to fly again, etc. We need technological advances to make a sustainable impact on the environment. And technological advances clearly means we need an economy that has enough money circulating for researchers to take a chance with innovations. So we're flying, but at lower altitudes and with different fuels. We're driving in increasingly green and smaller vehicles, maybe sharing when we can. And really importantly, that public transport is clean and reliable and functional. And it also strikes me that our attempts at being more eco-friendly, especially in the plastic space, have been reversed in a matter of weeks in the name of cleanliness. I've stopped using Dettol wipes and I've started again, even though I know it's soap that kills coronavirus. And something else I don't really understand is supermarkets suddenly not charging for plastic bags. But that aside, just thinking about this some more, I was reading an article, again in the Financial Times, clearly read that a lot, about the interplay between tackling the effect of COVID and tackling climate change by Christiana Figueres and Benjamin Zeiker. And they highlighted the challenge that I'm going to paraphrase now, that the pandemic-induced financial decisions made over the next 12 months will shape the global economy for the next decade, just at the same time that we must halve our emissions. Governments are unlikely to have the resources to direct capital at such scale towards other urgent global needs for years. So we must reconcile the tension between the frying pan of the pandemic and the fire of exacerbated climate change. We must integrate the solutions to both crises into a coherent response. So, this is one small example that's been around for a while, but, the example of using telematics in work vehicles that has triple bottom line benefits. And it seems to me that inclusive recovery programs propelling the global economy towards sustainable growth and increased resilience. So there's certainly some project work there, isn't there? But it also reminds me of a conversation with my colleague Alex Budzier from Oxford Said this month, where he was sharing his observations that the level of ambition for major projects is often very low. And he was sharing the example of a major infrastructure proposal, one that you will have heard of, but I won't name, with the ambition of 2% productivity improvement per annum on a 10-year project. Way too low. And if you think of that on the environment, we have the technology now to build homes that are net zero carbon impact and with no maintenance costs. So why don't we? As project professionals, I think we play a part in being ambitious. And there's clearly a huge difference between ambition and blind optimism. We need to be able to see the path to achieving the ambition and not rely on luck. But without ambition, well, I don't want to think about that outcome for my children and their children.
There we are. Simple question: achieving climate change targets. As a result of COVID-19, my commitment to climate change is.
So that's really quite marked to, towards commitment being higher, far more. It's not right at the extreme. So that real dilemma, of how we recover and tackle climate change at the same time. I really do think it's an area that we as project professionals can have a massive impact as we go forward. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm just going to press on and move on to the idea of emotional potential, the fourth E. So back to the triple strand. Whether we like it or not, visceral emotions are the biggest influence on our perceptions of what's risky and why, and therefore our choices and decisions under uncertainty. And we naturally succumb to what in risk psychology is called the pleasure principle. Are we scared? If we are, we do anything to avoid pain, i.e. we move away from what we don't want. And are we excited? If we are, we do anything to seek pleasure, i.e. what we do want. And we know that these emotions and other influences of the triple strand lead us to get in the way of our own good decisions. And right now, our emotional attachments to our old ways of working are challenged, maybe severed for good. So what now? You may be employed and the chances are that your job will remain. You may be employed and the future is really uncertain. You may be self-employed and know exactly what you're going to do next, or that you have no idea. And you may be unemployed, not through choice, already. These situations strike at the heart of what's important: the roof over our head, the food on our table. And depending on your situation, maybe you'll focus more on what you need rather than what you want right now. Borrowing unashamedly from Brené Brown's 2020 New Year's resolution, it's pinned on my office wall, we need to be awkward, brave and kind, to have courage and to be kind to ourselves and others when plan A goes awry. So my final question is to get the mood of this group in terms of our feelings about our future as project professionals.
People have a couple of options to submit answers. I think it's probably a mix. The biggest item in there is optimistic, excited, hopeful. So the positive ones coming through.
Amazing.
There's some, perhaps next down is uncertain, cautious, cautiously optimistic. So a wide range, I would say.
Brilliant. Well, that's really good to hear. And yeah, I too am cautiously optimistic. With everything else I've talked about today, we have choices to make. We have choices to make under massive uncertainty, and our emotional state has a massive effect on that. It can feel overwhelming. We could put in our head in the sand and keep everything crossed, or not, and have eyes open choices and the dance of resilience. We can never be entirely rational. We're not programmed that way, but we do have some choices here. Someone the other week reminded me of Nassim Nicholas Taleb's book, Anti-Fragile. I don't know whether you've read it. I would recommend it. It's not an easy read, but definitely worth it. Its main thesis is that we've become more fragile than we sensibly should be. Think about our global connectedness, and that the way out of that is not more padding, not more control, not more regulation, but greater flexibility and a willingness to have a go, to learn and fail. And that this will require a different sort of leadership than we've maybe been used to experiencing or providing. In a complex and interconnected world, there are no simple answers, and no one individual can possibly know what to do. Control is an illusion. So maybe heroes have had their day. Rather than heroes, we need leaders who acknowledge they can't do it all themselves and who lead from within and not the front, empowering and bringing out the best in others. To quote Taleb, anti-fragility is beyond resilience or robustness. The resilient resists shocks and stays the same. The anti-fragile gets better. Resilience in this crisis has produced some amazing heroes. Becoming more anti-fragile, getting better, is likely to need something else. So my favourite quote from Taleb's Anti-Fragile, and one that resonates with human potential in all its guises, is this: difficulties wake up the genius. There are always more questions than answers, and it seems never more so than in our current position. In our world as project professionals, the 4 E's of economic, e-working, ecological and emotional potential seem closely linked to me, and probably worthy of a systems diagram. But using a simple Venn diagram for now, whether it's the inseparability of decisions on the economy and the environment, or the paradox caused by benefits from e-working on the one hand and the negative consequences of this decision on parts of the economy, or our emotional state in the longer term, we will address one part of the puzzle without thought for the others at our peril. So what's in that central intersection on the Venn diagram, the thing that all the E's share? Well, maybe it's a willingness to be clear about our objectives, to understand the available data that relates to our situation, whether that's in-your-face facts or weak signals about emerging trends, and our ability to make and help others make eyes-open choices about change, accepting that we'll have difficult trade-offs, but knowing that if we collaborate, we have a better chance of doing a better job. I have unfailing faith in human potential. I believe the potential in each one of us and in the groups and organisations that we're part of is huge, a massive energy just waiting to be unleashed. What will we do with that energy? Hopefully, this has been thought-provoking and helped you think about your role in shaping the best possible future in your world. thank you for listening. If you're interested in following up on some of the sources I've used today, then this you can have the slides and the references that I've given are shown there. And so now I think it's back to Naomi, and she'll field questions. Really interested to hear those and to continue to engage as we go forward. Thank you again for listening, and back to you, Naomi.
Ruth, thank you very much indeed. I think I speak for everybody when I say that was an extremely thought-provoking presentation. I'm going to start with the first one, which I think is a really interesting one. Some of the responses we've been getting, you seemed surprised at, some you agreed with. How would you like to comment on the responses that you've got throughout this presentation? And do you think the kind of attitudes that people have talked about here are going to stick?
So that is a great question. I'll tackle my bias for in the first instance. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? In thinking about this, obviously we all have our own perspectives. I mean, mine shifts daily. I can tell you now, I'm a very confused lady. But yeah, I was there were some areas that I was expecting different things than what we got. Yeah, I don't know whether this will stick. You know, is just this today's viewpoint, and you know, another week on. Every week seems like a month, doesn't it? And a month seems like a year, and maybe things will shift. I've been quite surprised, I guess, at you know, some of the responses today about commitment to doing things differently. And I guess all I'd say is that I really hope some of these things stick, because I think that we've got an opportunity to make things better.
Well, if we kind of develop that idea then, and I'm going to group together a series of questions now, Ruth. Do seem to be fundamental changes going on in societal attitudes. Changes on how consumption works. Are we going to all live in a virtual reality world? What does it really mean in terms of working from home? So if we're looking at possibly fundamental societal changes in attitude, how do you think we best deal with these when we come to thinking about risk and change in projects?
Very good questions, aren't they?
They are.
Yeah, deserves a good answer. So yeah, I acknowledge. I think see, I'm really torn here. I think that there are some really big questions that we could seize. I think there is a risk that they'll almost go into the too hard box, and we'll all just slip back to, you know, muddling through and doing our best. I mean, I would say this because it's the work that I do, but I think we need to have some proper conversations. And one of the things that's really worrying me is that the big conversations that I believe boards and senior teams and project teams and organisations need to have, it looks like we're going to have them virtually. And, you know, that's a real worry for me, because, you know, we know that we've got far fewer communication cues when we're doing that. So, you know, I would like to see over this year that organisations take an opportunity to have some big conversations, you know, that really go back to basics, really think about assumptions, don't just try and muddle through and get back to normal, but think about, and it is a cliche, but about what new normal, you know, could be, and hopefully we can all be involved in those conversations.
And again, taking that idea further then, and sadly I think this is going to have to be our last question. We're talking there about the need to have these big conversations, the need to devote resource to these ideas. And one of the questions that came up was trying to find the resource to consider these multiple planning options. How do we make sure that we devote the time to this when there are going to be so many busy pulls in our time in other directions?
Yeah, it's real, and I agree there will be. I mean, there will be so many other pools, and it's the image that pops up in my mind is the thing from the Stephen Covey 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and sorting out what's urgent and important. We're always challenged by that, aren't we? I know that I am. It's far easier and sometimes more rewarding to do something that's urgent than important. But I think, for leaders, and there are a number of leaders, on this call, and we're all leaders in our own ways, even if in our families, that we do spend some time and really work out, to differentiate what's going to be really important for the long term rather than urgent. I mean, it's a very shallow answer, but deserves a better one. And I really, I do intend to, try and work with some of this data going forward, and to maybe put out some other ideas that we can hopefully continue a conversation about.
Well, thanks for that, Ruth. We have got, as you can imagine, very many more interesting questions that we haven't actually got time to pose, but it's reassuring to know that you're going to continue this engagement. Thank you for an incredibly thought-provoking presentation. And to quote Taleb back at you, I hope that the difficulties we're facing will wake up the genius in all of us. Thanks very much indeed, Ruth.
Thank you, Naomi.